empires don't just vanish, they leave behind cracks waiting to be filled. When the mighty Satavahanas collapsed, the Deccan didn't fall into silence. Instead, it whispered a new name, Vakataka. In the 3rd century CE, amidst the shifting sands of Andhra and Maharashtra, a new dynasty began to rise. The Vakatakas weren't conquerors from afar. They were sons of the Deccan, stepping forward to fill the void of fallen powers. Their beginnings were humble, yet their ambitions were anything but. At the heart of this emergence stands a mysterious figure, Vindhyashakti. His name echoes like a ghost through scattered inscriptions, yet his story remains elusive. We don't know his victories, we don't know his court, but we know this: he lit the first spark of Vakataka power. Unlike other dynasties that roared into history, the Vakatakas crept forward with quiet strength. From fragmented feudatories to sovereign kings, their rise wasn't sudden, it was calculated. They watched, they waited, and when the time was right, they stepped forward. The fall of the Satavahanas wasn't the end of an age, it was the beginning of a legacy yet to be written. From Vindhyashakti's shadow, a true architect of empire emerged, Pravarasena I. He wasn't just a king, he was a builder of futures, a dreamer of dynasties. Where Vindhyashakti lit the spark, Pravarasena fanned it into a roaring flame. No longer content with small territories, he expanded the Vakataka domain deep into Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and Vidarbha. For the first time, inscriptions spoke proudly of Samrat Pravarasena, ruler of rulers, the only Vakataka to assume the lofty title of an emperor. Under him, the Vakatakas transformed from local chieftains into a recognized imperial force of the Deccan. But with great power came necessary division. To manage this growing empire, Pravarasena split his dominion between branches, Vatsagulma in the south and Nandivardhana in the north. This wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Each branch would carry the Vakataka banner, expanding influence across regions, languages, and cultures. What began as whispers under Vindhyashakti now echoed like thunder across the plateau. The Vakatakas were no longer filling a void, they were creating a legacy. 2 branches, 1 empire, a storm gathering strength ready to carve its mark into Indian history. With the empire now split, 2 lines of power rose, each carrying the weight of Vakataka destiny. The Nandivardhana branch, ruling from near present day Nagpur, became the heart of the empire. This was the seat of central authority, the backbone that connected politics, economy, and the royal lineage. Here, kings forged alliances, issued grants, and kept the machinery of empire running smoothly. Nandivardhana stood not just as a capital, but as a symbol of Vakataka order. But power doesn't thrive in isolation. To the south, another flame burned, the Vatsagulma branch. Based near today's Vashim in Maharashtra, this line was the sword arm of the dynasty. Where Nandivardhana was administration, Vatsagulma was ambition. Its kings expanded influence deeper into the Deccan, holding key routes to southern India. For a time, these 2 branches worked in harmony, a perfect balance of mind and muscle, pen and sword. Together, they expanded the Vakataka name far beyond its modest beginnings. But beneath this unity, cracks waited to form. And soon, the fate of the Vakatakas would no longer depend on their divisions, but on who could hold it all together. Even empires need allies. And in the grand chessboard of ancient India, few alliances were as cunning or as ambitious as the one between the Vakatakas and the Guptas. The Guptas, rising as a pan Indian force from the north, were crafting what many call the golden age of India. And the Vakatakas, ruling the Deccan, stood at the doorway to the southern trade routes. Both needed each other. What followed wasn't just strategy, it was marriage. A royal union bound the 2 powers together. Prabhavati Gupta, daughter of the mighty Chandragupta II, was married to Rudrasena II, a Vakataka prince. Suddenly, Gupta influence poured into the Deccan, not through swords, but through silk, politics, and bloodlines. But alliances come with consequences. After Rudrasena's untimely death, Prabhavati Gupta took charge as regent for her young sons, bringing Gupta cultural, political, and religious ideals into the Vakataka court. Rudrasena II's short reign was enough to deepen this relationship, weaving Gupta aesthetics into the very identity of the Deccan elite. For a moment, it looked like two worlds were merging. But alliances built on marriage and politics are delicate, and behind the glitter of gold and silk, new power struggles were already stirring. While politics and alliances shaped the outside within the Vakataka court, another force was rising faith, and at its forefront stood Prithivishana II, a king not just remembered for wars or diplomacy, but for his deep commitment to preserving Dharma. Prithivishana strengthened the Brahmanical order with land grants to temples and scholars, building a religious identity that defined Vakataka rule. Inscriptions praised him as a defender of the faith, a title earned not by force, but by unwavering devotion to sacred duties. Under his reign, stability returned. The empire, once pulled by Gupta influences, reasserted its own voice, rooted in Deccan traditions. But dynasties always find their zenith, and for the Vakatakas, that moment arrived with Harishena. More than a king, Harishena was a visionary. His court wasn't just about power, it was about creating something eternal. Under him, the empire expanded, the arts flourished, and a dream began to take shape in the cliffs of Ajanta. Where Prithivishana defended the old, Harishena dared to imagine the new. The Vakatakas were no longer just rulers of land, they were now shaping the spiritual and artistic heart of India. A golden era had begun, but golden ages never last forever. Amid the dense forests and rugged cliffs of Maharashtra, a wonder was being carved, not in stone alone, but in spirit. Under King Harishena, the Vakatakas gave the world their greatest legacy, the Ajanta caves. These weren't just temples or monasteries, they were visual symphonies, echoing with prayer, painted in silence and alive with stories. The Vakataka court poured its wealth into these walls, patronizing monks, artisans, and architects to create what remains one of India's greatest cultural treasures. Caves 1 to 5, in particular, reflect Harishena's personal vision, filled with exquisite murals, seated Buddhas, bodhisattvas with gentle eyes, and ceilings that shimmer like galaxies of devotion. Every stroke was deliberate, every image sacred. What's remarkable is this: the Vakatakas were primarily Shaivites, yet they gave their fullest support to Buddhist art. This wasn't just tolerance, it was celebration. Ajanta became a sacred space for philosophy, storytelling, and artistic experimentation. In those caverns, time stood still. The clang of war and the whisper of politics faded. All that remained was faith and the brushstrokes of a civilization at peace with its many beliefs. Ajanta was more than a monument, it was the soul of the Vakatakas made visible. Behind the painted caves and royal conquests lay the quieter rhythms of empire, the pulse of palace life, the rituals that bound belief, and the order that held a kingdom together. In the Vakataka court, culture wasn't decoration, it was identity. Poets, scholars, and priests moved through marble halls and temple courtyards, exchanging verses and philosophy. The Vakatakas blended Sanskritic learning with Deccan traditions, creating a courtly culture that was refined yet rooted. Daily rituals weren't just spiritual, they were political theater. Sacred fires, elaborate yajnas, gifts to Brahmins, and temple festivals all reinforced royal legitimacy. The king wasn't merely a ruler, he was the axis of cosmic order, the bridge between heaven and earth. But none of it worked without structure. The Vakataka administration was tight and efficient. Land grants were recorded with precision. Regional governors held sway through a clear hierarchy, and taxes flowed through a disciplined system. The use of copperplate inscriptions reveals a state deeply engaged in its legal and territorial duties. This was no chaotic court. It was a finely tuned machine wrapped in tradition. The Vakatakas ruled not just by sword, but by ritual, record, and rhythm. And for a time, the empire held steady, prosperous, ordered, and alive with meaning. Power alone doesn't build civilizations, faith and prosperity do. And the Vakatakas mastered both. Though personally Shaivites, the Vakatakas stood out for their remarkable religious tolerance. Shiva temples rose under their patronage, but so did Buddhist monasteries, especially the breathtaking Ajanta caves. Even Jainism found quiet corners of support. For the Vakatakas, religious harmony wasn't charity, it was smart governance. They knew that unity in faith meant unity in society. But faith alone couldn't hold an empire. Economy was the lifeblood. The Deccan's fertile soils fed millions, while its forests and mines provided timber, iron, and precious minerals. More importantly, the Vakatakas controlled key trade routes, linking the north to the south, the ports of Western India to the heart of the subcontinent. Merchants thrived, artisans organized into powerful guilds. Cities like Vatsagulma became bustling centers of commerce, alive with markets and temples standing side by side. Taxes were fair, administration stable, and the wealth flowed upwards and outwards, financing both war and worship. In their balance of ritual and revenue, the Vakatakas created something rare, a civilization at peace with itself, alive with belief, culture, and prosperity. But even golden ages carry the seeds of their own undoing. All golden ages have their twilight. For the Vakatakas, that moment came with the death of Harishena. The king who had raised Ajanta and expanded the empire left behind no strong heir, no guiding hand to hold the branches together. Without Harishena, the balance shattered. The Vatsagulma and Nandivardhana lines drifted apart, and once loyal feudatories began carving out their own power. What was once a united empire became a fractured mosaic of local rulers, each pulling in different directions. Worse still, the records fall silent. The inscriptions that once boasted of victories and temple grants disappeared into the dust. No great battle marked their fall, just a slow, steady unraveling. The wealth dried up, trade routes shifted, patronage to art and temples faded. Into this growing vacuum stepped the Kalachuris of Mahishmati. They didn't conquer with war, but with opportunity. As Vakataka control weakened, the Kalachuris moved in, taking cities, absorbing administration, and reshaping the Deccan's political map. The Vakatakas didn't fall with a roar. They vanished with a whisper. Once emperors, they became footnotes. The dynasty that filled the silence after the Satavahanas had now become a silence of its own. Empires fall, names fade, but stone remembers. Though the Vakatakas disappeared from the royal stage, their legacy still stands, carved into the cliffs of Ajanta. The murals they commissioned still whisper stories of kings, gods, and ordinary people. Colors have faded, walls have cracked, but the vision remains, a frozen breath of a forgotten age. Their legacy isn't just in temples or caves, but in the echoes of cultural tolerance. The Vakatakas proved that Hindu kings could fund Buddhist shrines, that different faiths could share the same soil, that art and power could shape history together. But for centuries, the Vakatakas were overshadowed by the Guptas, dismissed as vassals or forgotten entirely. The reality was far richer. They were rulers in their own right, architects of a balanced, prosperous Deccan world. Myth said they were minor players. Reality shows they were empire builders. Their story reminds us that not all greatness wears a crown of fame. Some dynasties rule for glory, others for gold, but the Vakatakas ruled for something rarer, a legacy of devotion, balance, and beauty. Ajanta still stands. The Vakatakas still speak, if you know how to listen.
History is a blend of fact, interpretation, and imagination. The stories are inspired by historical accounts, myths, and cultural legacies. While we aim to bring history alive, we encourage you to explore, research, and question these narratives.